I love super saloons, but unfortunately many of them are very expensive. Today I'm going to talk you through 5 in particular that are super cheap, super great value for money, and that I think have a bit of pedigree and history to them, and are well worth purchasing if you can't afford to get yourself into a lovely M5 competition or that kind of stuff. Hit like if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe as well if you're new. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. Mark my words, one day the best examples of the Impreza WRX STI are going to be worth a small fortune, as a cult classic car already with a large fan base, a history of rallying success, a healthy tuning community, and a legendary rivalry with the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo that must be one of the most well known in all of the motoring world. Another thing that makes these quite well known is their engines, because of the way that they sound, given they have that 2-litre turbocharged Boxer 4 engine which makes 261 brake horsepower, taking them to 60 in 5.3 seconds, which isn't even the full story, as in the early days many were tested by reviewers as doing way better numbers than even that. I've mentioned before that this car was named the most iconic rally car of all time, or at least the previous generation Impreza was, and as I alluded to in the intro for it, it's a highly versatile car. It had multiple facelifts, and the only one I would recommend potentially avoiding is the Hawkeye, not because it looks bad, but because it got the 2.5 litre engine, which I'll touch on a little bit later. Instead, get yourself a Bug-Eye or a Blob-Eye, especially now as they are starting to gain in classic status, as the interiors I would say were pretty poor on release, but now have a bit of classic charm to them. For me, this is one of those childhood dream cars that I'm pretty sure I'll own at some point in the future. I'll do you a deal as well, 5,000 likes on this video and I'll buy one to make videos on. These are only around £10,000 at the bottom end nowadays, so they have been creeping up in price, and typically you'll find quite a few at the sub 15k mark. The 2-litre engine block is better known for its reliability than the 2.5-litre block, as I mentioned, which suffered from ringland and head gasket issues, but as it's an aging Japanese car, rust is pretty common on them and well worth checking. In the UK, muscle cars are pretty hard to come by, but what's even more difficult to find is an Australian muscle car, the kind of car that gives vibes of the V8 supercars that blast around the iconic Bathurst track. They're so rare, in fact, that there are fewer than 400 Vauxhall VXR8s on the roads here in the UK right now, and it's really a car you'll rarely see driving around. And it's got an absolutely massive engine too, a 6-litre V8 to be exact, which makes 411 brake horsepower, taking it to 60 in 4.9 seconds, relatively low pace actually out of an engine of its size, but plenty enough to have a bunch of fun. It was of course built by the Aussie brand Holden Special Vehicles and exported to the UK market under Vauxhall's Performance VXR brand, and on hitting the market in 2007, it really did a great job of appearing all over car media, but wasn't an easy sell in our market. In Australia, by the way, it was called the HSV Club Sport, which aligned with the first gen VXR8, which ran until 2009 when the second gen VXR8 came out, which was instead the HSV GTS, and the new VXR8 was effectively a newer version of the similarly Aussie Vauxhall Monaro. What's interesting is this car aimed to compete with the German performance large executive car class like the M5 or equivalent, but it lacks the luxuries and poise that those cars have, so it only really garnered interest from petrol heads with an enjoyment of V8 supercars, hence there are so few of these in the UK compared to those German cars today. And as these are so rare, they can be tough to find for sale, but I found one at the £16,500 mark for this video, and I've seen them for both more or less than that in the past, though currently this makes it the most expensive car on the list. Reliability is known to be generally pretty good on these, given the engine block is an LS block, and repairs can be a bit pricey for a Vauxhall given the rarity of this car. We're halfway through and I wanted to stop for just a second to remind you to hit the like button and subscribe as well if you're new here, and let me know in the comments down below, what is your personal favourite super saloon? What's the best super saloon of all time? I'd love to hear your thoughts. The Audi S8 is very different to all the other cars on this list, and it is basically a performance version of a full-size luxury car, which pretty much refuses to compromise on either performance or luxury. It didn't get an RS8 version, so the S8 was about as performant as you'd get from the A8 badge, and that's probably for the best, as the RS badge probably would have taken the performance a bit too far, and you've lost out on a bit of the luxury, particularly when you think that the S8 comes with a 5.2-litre V10 engine that isn't a million miles away from the one in the Lamborghini Gallardo. It's tuned for a luxury car though, putting out 443 brake horsepower, which you get from 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds, matching the VXR8. Now what's interesting about these is that some have argued that you should instead go for the A8 W12 if you want a car that's focused on luxury, with an engine that wafts you along comfortably, or go for one of the slightly smaller engine options of the A8 if you want performance, as many are cheaper without being too much slower than the S8, but the S8 badge adds a little bit of of spice into the mix, with slightly more performance-focused suspension, the sportier seats which remain comfortable, the slightly different materials used on the interior to denote the performance, like the carbon fibre and that kind of stuff, and most importantly a V10 engine note, which is impossible not to love in my books. And given it's probably the most comfortable car on this list, with still the third best 0 to 60 time, it's definitely deserved of the cheap Super Saloon title. £10,000 around the moon you'll find these listed for, and typically you'll find them sitting at around the 12 to 14k mark, which isn't too bad for the package you're getting. That engine is genuinely not known to be badly built, and it's relatively understrained in these cars, but suspension can be an expensive part to replace if it goes, and they are known to be pretty pricey to run. The Jaguar XFRS for me is effectively a baby Project 8, but unfortunately the price definitely reflects that. For that reason, in this video taking a slight step down to the car that shares the same chassis and engine, just being a little bit less savage overall, the XFR, which is a competitor to cars like the BMW M5, Audi RS6, Mercedes E63 AMG and the likes. Now I mentioned that engine and it really is a beast. In fact, it's the most powerful engine on the list, a 5-litre supercharged V8 which makes 502 brake horsepower, which is taken from 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, which is some pretty insane pickup for the cheapest car on the list. In terms of differences over the standard XFR, much of it is hard to see to the naked eye. Yes, it came with a revised front bumper and a spoiler, and some different alloy options, but all in, it's not a million miles away from the standard XF. Even on the interior, it's got a bit of extra bolstering and some aggressive material choices, but all in, it's not too different looking. In reality, it all comes down to that performance, so I would certainly call this a bit of a sleeper. Ideally, I would go for a post-2011 facelift, as I do think this modernised the car pretty well and made it a little bit more aggressive, but there's actually quite a difference in price between the facelift and pre-facelift. But either way, you're getting a car with intelligent aerodynamics and chassis design from a legend of car design, Ian Callum. I mentioned it's the cheapest car on the list, and that's because these start at around £7,000, with 10k being enough to get you into quite a few examples. JLR aren't known for their reliability at the moment, but that engine block is one of the better ones. You will find horror stories on owners forums though, which have led to some insane bills, but in general those are few and far between. Worth mentioning, I also saw a few complaints about the infotainment and the likes breaking as well. I personally am a huge fan of the Mercedes E55 AMG, as I think it's done a good job of going a bit under the radar in terms of its looks, while simultaneously offering a car that those in the know will certainly appreciate. I'd almost consider it a sleeper. If you took the badges off it, I'm not sure many people would look twice at one. Which is why I think it's funny that it's the quickest car on the list, with its 5.4-litre supercharged V8 engine, which makes 469 brake horsepower, taking it to 60 in 4.5 seconds, which is enough to trouble a lot of cars. This came with the W211 generation before the E63 badge took it over, and was the second generation E55 after the W210. It made a huge splash on release, becoming the world's fastest production saloon, meaning I refuse to accept that it isn't worthy of the cheap Super Saloon title. It also came, of course, with all of the expected AMG tuning to the brakes and suspension, and would manage 0 to 100 miles per hour in 9.8 seconds, 1.2 seconds faster than its rival generation Audi RS6. That said, some reviews did knock the car for not handling well enough, but that didn't stop it becoming the best-selling AMG car all the way up until the C63 AMG arrived. It also shared its engine with the SL55 AMG, an engine which won Engine of the Year in fact, though it was slightly less powerful in the E55 due to it having a longer, thinner exhaust, which muffled just a little bit of that brake horsepower. If you want one though, you'll need to spend around £9,000 at the bottom end, but it's a surprisingly rare car, so it can be very difficult to find any at all, and the prices can range drastically depending on how good the condition is. It's actually known to be a very reliable AMG, which is always a positive, but I would watch out for a reasonably high general ownership cost on these, with repair costs being pretty high if you're unlucky. That was a much more reasonable price range right there of Super Saloons, and if you want to see some more slightly more expensive ones, then click up here, subscribe as well down here. Huge thanks to you guys for watching, the patrons for their support as well. I will see you in the next one.